Welcome to the Secure Connections podcast, brought to you by IOTSA, the Internet of Things Security Services Association. I'm Brian Sherman, Content Director for IOTSA, and on today's episode, I'll be discussing a security-first approach in the current risk climate with Gill Langston, Head Security Nerd at Solarwinds MSP. Welcome to the Secure Connections podcast, Gill.
Hey, it's great to be here, Brian. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. I got a chance to spend some time with you last month at our IOTSA Cybersecurity Expo in Houston, and I'm glad you agreed to join us today for the podcast. I wanted to follow up on some of the things you talked about and dig in a little deeper into who Gill is as well. So first off, let's learn a little more about you and how you got to be head nerd for a major tech company, which is one of my favorite titles of all. So what led you to this life of cybercrime, Gill?
Yeah, so first, I do always joke that it's good to have now an official status of what my friends and family have always called me. So there's official confirmation there. Yeah, so as far as cybersecurity and security in general, it's what I gravitated towards over the years. I've done everything from support to sales engineering, system engineering, product management. And because of my first entry points into a company that had a ton of security products for small and medium businesses, that's kind of where my focus started to turn, especially with the realization that most small and medium businesses just don't seem to have the skill set or the level of protection that they need. So they're always looking to somebody to help give them advice and information. And to your point, that's kind of where this head nerd thing came into play. Which I'm super excited about. One of the reasons, is that a lot of times, you're brought on as a product manager or some other side, and you talk about something, and of course, it always has to map exactly to your product. Well, with the head nerd, it's great because my goal and my directive here is to help managed service providers be successful in security. Right? That means, sometimes it might be our product. Sometimes it might be someone else's product. It's a process. It's people. So that's the super exciting part of this, right? Our goal at SolarWinds MSP is to make MSPs successful. And now that's, my core is to then discuss these issues, come up with solutions and advice that helps them be more successful. So I'm really excited about that.
Yeah, and I always like to ask about the, how you started your career thing, because we get a lot of MSPs, obviously looking to hire, which is a challenge, but also we get some younger people listening to the podcast that aren't sure, is a tech career right for me? Is this the direction I want to go? So, did you envision yourself being in a tech career when you were in high school?
So I did. I mean, when I was in high school, I was always kind of the techie guy. I was one of the first guys who got I got this really cool little, I guess you'd call it a tablet computer, but at the time it came in like a leather-bound case, like a Dolphin, I think was the name, and it opened up and it had like handwriting recognition. This is like 90s, early 90s, and I'm showing all my friends, look, this is the internet. This is like the next big thing, and they're all like, "Yeah, you're crazy, whatever." But yeah, so I always had a fascination with tech. Now, for years right after high school, it actually focused more on mechanical. I did a lot of things. I actually worked as a motorcycle mechanic right out of high school and did a lot of that. And that gravitated into computers on motorcycles and the big Gold Wings and those types of bikes where you had tons of computers and wiring. And so it was kind of a natural progression. And then I got into, of course, I'm the tech support guy for the family, right? And
Sure.
Then you're the tech support guy at the motorcycle shop. And next thing you know, you're messing with servers and VPNs and things like that. And so it was kind of this natural progression into technical and security.
So, and in your role as the head nerd at SolarWinds MSP,
Mm-hmm.
you mentioned I won't say it's ad hoc job, but you get a lot of flexibility here. Can you kind of go into what are some of the things specifically that you're doing with MSPs?
Sure, absolutely. So, the first thing, always in any job or any profession that I get into, the first thing I want to do is learn more and more and more and more. Yeah, I've been focused on security for years. And like I said, I kind of came from the vendor side for a while. I did support a lot of people. I helped configure and set things up. A lot of it was MSP focused. But the first thing is to talk to MSPs, right? My experience in a lot of situations, some of the vendors I've worked for over the years, there seemed to be this kind of disconnect sometimes between what a managed service provider does day to day and what a vendor thinks you should be telling them to do day to day, if you get my drift. So what I want to do is talk to as many MSPs as possible and kind of hear their day to day, their challenges, their problems, and then come up with kind of real world solutions. Sometimes you can get really heady about the whole thing and start talking about, mapping to all these different requirements and regulations and all that. But day to day, an MSP has a lot of hard work to do, and they're worried about counting every click and the time that they spend. So hearing from MSPs what they need to be successful and where they struggle is number one, right? But then from there, we're going to take all of that and kind of talk about best practices, talk about what they can do to kind of stair step their way to a more secure environment. Since I'm the security nerd, we do also have automation nerds, operation nerd, backup nerds. So we have several different kind of areas of focus. But for me, it's understanding how I can help. And what we're going to do in the short term is, of course, I'm doing blog posts and bringing up things that are going on in the industry that might be important to a small and medium business, and therefore the service providers that support them. On top of that, though, I'll be, I have a Twitter account that I'm tweeting things that are interesting. That's cybersec_nerd is the Twitter handle. But also doing boot camps, where we really drill into what you can do to be secure today based on the current landscape, those blogs, video blogs, things like that. But it's really about conversations with the MSP. It's not just creating a bunch of content that, hey, look at these products. It's, hey, look at these challenges, and let's talk to other MSPs about how they solve them and figure out how you can as well.
So it sounds like, in your position, you've been freed up, and I don't want to overuse that term, but you can focus on end users and client issues and the other problems that MSPs run into, as well as the opportunities. But what are some of the important things that providers need to know about the current state of security and for their customers, and what are others telling you in that along the line too?
This year's pretty tough out there for small and medium businesses and managed service providers, right? I mean, you started the year off, or actually ended last year with just this barrage. Like every day, another news article about ransomware. The business email compromise concern that's out there for a lot of businesses, and then on top of that, then you started stacking the managed service providers themselves being compromised as kind of the entry point into those small and medium businesses. So, for a long time, when you look at cybersecurity and you hear people talking about APTs and these nation state groups and all that, the first thing that you think of is large enterprise. They're going after high value targets. But at the end of the day, when you're talking about ransomware and things like that, a group of SMBs underneath an MSP, pretty high value target. So the concern has just been growing and growing and growing over the last year or so, that small and medium businesses are just at risk when it comes to the types of threats that are out there, and they don't know where to turn. Right? That's the challenge. Is they see all this stuff and they're like, I hope I'm protected.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And we were in Texas last month, which was, I think it was the beginning of the year, where they had 6 municipalities, or was it around the holidays? 6 municipalities were hit at the same time, and come to find out it was an MSP that got hit. Because, if you look at the SMB, the cyber criminals can do the shotgun approach and try to hit as many small businesses as possible, or they can laser in and target, one MSP and get a hold of a lot of business data if they're successful getting through. So what on that front, are you suggesting, or what are you hearing from your partners as far as fears, apprehension, and challenges at securing their own MSP?
Well, so, as far as securing your own MSP, it's kind of the same thing that an SMB might come to an MSP and say, what do I got to do to not get breached, right? So it's the same kind of thing. Honestly, every one of these managed service providers, this is their livelihood, right? And to know that somebody could just kind of step in and take all that away or jeopardize their business is of real concern. So it's, what are the signs? What are the things I need to be looking for? How can I better protect my environment? And in most cases, that usually comes down to just like anything in cybersecurity, best practices and cyber hygiene and making sure you're following those. That's a challenge sometimes for service providers because it's today's reaction that you have to deal with, right? It's taking care of that customer's needs today and not always stopping and saying, okay, let's kind of do a review or an overview of all of our processes, our practices, and the solutions that we're using to stay secure, right? You hear the adage all the time, the cobbler's kids always need shoes. Well, that can be a concern too in this space, because if the MSP is not focused on, their own internal security, protecting those credentials, those crown jewels of their customers, that's where they're at risk. The number one thing I hear, and I've seen this in several articles, is sometimes that entry point is reused credentials used in a remote management tool to get remote access to the customers that didn't have two-factor, right? So there are actually a couple of things in there that are of concern. And that is, you're not having two-factor turned on these essentially crown jewel entry points. But then secondarily, I know so many people. Look, I always say people are humans and humans do human things. And human things sometimes is to reuse passwords or use passwords that you know. So as you see, there's a breach every other day, it seems like, and you can go to Have I Been Pwned or one of those and see what credentials are out there or what have been exposed. So if they're reusing any credentials for anything, like a password they used 3 years ago for LinkedIn, it's out there. And if it's tied to an account, there's an easy access point all the way into a remote management tool that can give you remote access to the small and medium business. So going back to those and saying no compromise, right? We have to make sure we're protecting these credentials. No spreadsheet sitting on a share somewhere. We need a proper credential management, password management tool, something that will let you control and monitor the access to all of those credentials, not reusing the same credentials across all customers. Those are some of the key things that even if you do have a breach or a breach attempt, you could limit exposure for. So, it's easy to say that those are all, cyber hygiene 101. But at the end of the day, sometimes, as I mentioned, okay, I've got to stop for a minute and make sure that we're not doing things for expediency or efficiency that are actually putting us at risk.
Right. One thing I've seen over the last, I would say, 3 to 4 months at our expos is a higher number of MSPs having either their own CISO, like hiring somebody full-time to manage their security, making sure awareness training is done, making sure multi-factor authentication is implemented and actually being followed, all the best practices. And even those that can't afford to have a full-time person are at least taking time to go, we need one person assigned to this, and more crucially, we need to give them the time to do this, going back to the cobbler's shoes. What are you seeing in the industry as far as that? Is that a trend that's going to continue?
Well, it is a trend. For a long time, managed service providers, obviously they're offering a service, and that service is everything from print services to desktops to license management to email management to, you add this list and security's in there somewhere. Sometimes when I go to some of the managed service provider sites, every once in a while I like to do spot checks. And sometimes it's several clicks before you get to the word security, which is, it can be concerning sometimes, especially in this climate for a small to medium business. But, when it comes to all of that, you don't necessarily, I'm not going to say that you should have a vCISO or a CISO right away. But to your point, having those technicians sitting at their desks, they're banging out tickets. You're monitoring your 75% utilization or whatever on making sure tickets are handled. It really is a good idea, and I'm seeing more and more people assigning somebody in their organization to be at least a subject matter expert on security. Right? Maybe not a full CISO role right away, but what they are doing is making sure that, again, revisiting new processes and procedures. Do they fit our security model? Are the things that we're doing secure? And then in turn, using that same expertise to then talk to the customers and say, here's what we're doing for you. Here's how we secure your environment, your credentials, your crown jewels, right? And then saying, now let's do an analysis of yours. So that SME role may not always be able to be tied directly to one customer and have that one for one, billable every billable hour. But think about the alternative. How many incidents do you have to respond to? Even if it's one of these one-off, I clicked on a website and it actually it encrypted my data on this one system, and now I've got to go clean that system up. I hopefully don't have to roll a truck, but maybe I do. I've got to go out there and clean that system up, wipe it away, reinstall all my software, and get that set up. So what's that costing you? And it really depends on your model, but what's that costing you? Versus having somebody where you're actually investing on your side in that user education, that prevention, tightening things up to protect the customer. So it's a balance, but I would argue a subject matter expert starts out as someone who is, okay, it's your job to stay up to speed on what's going on. It's your job to know when it's time to change our processes or procedures, and then disseminate that to all technicians or across the group. And then also maybe start spending some time in those QBRs or monthly business reviews that we're doing with the customers to discuss security with them.
Yeah, I'm just wondering too on how many IT services business owners, you have a dashboard, you're looking at cash flow, you're looking at accounts receivable, utilization of your bench, all of these numbers. I wonder how many are focusing on or adding metrics for security and what those would look like. But that's probably a direction we should be looking to go, monitoring on a daily, if not weekly basis. Or
I would agree. I mean, so a lot of times, sometimes security products, especially if you're just getting started, you're focused on really small businesses who just they're not interested in the nuts and bolts of it. Just am I protected, right? So you've got your endpoint security stuff. You've maybe got a firewall that's blocking malicious websites or bad websites, that kind of thing. I would recommend a shift, not just focusing on, well, we got to manage the software, make sure that it's running, right? Instead of going from managing software, it's managing risk and saying, okay, I'll give you a great example. We talk about user training. Sure, we do user training maybe at the beginning. We say, don't click on bad things. For business email compromise, we say, all right, kind of verify who's asking for this payment to be made. Don't just respond to the email, but find another way to verify that payment should be made. But at the end of the day, think about this. What if you had a dashboard that showed actually blocked attempts? So whatever the antivirus caught, right? Whatever was blocked, at the firewall or your web filtering. And then you put that together and said, well, these users, there's a lot of blocks for these users in these locations. Maybe we should then turn around and make these user training opportunities and then use that to go back into the business and say, we've got people engaging in risky behavior. So to me, a really cool dashboard would actually be stuff that was blocked.
Makes sense.
Not just, oh gosh, blinking red light, there's a connection made to a known bad. Yes, you need to respond to that. But from a day-to-day, having a, top offenders, or a nicer way to say that, training opportunities dashboard, I think is a good value for a managed service provider.
I'm sure there are many higher risk end users in most businesses, so it would be good to look at that. So one of the other discussion points I have with MSPs a lot of times, it seems like when coming up with objections and challenges that they run into, that most of their SMBs believe the providers have all the protection bases covered, even if they're at the lowest tiered security offering. They think, well, you got me covered no matter what. I don't need to pay more. How can MSPs ensure that their clients look more realistically at their risks and then pay for the protection that they actually need?
I would actually go, Brian, I would take it a step further and say that absolutely, when you ask an SMB, what are you doing for security? I got a managed service provider has all that covered for me. That's literally what they're saying out there. They're not saying, well, I've got some basics in place. They picked from your list of, good, better, best offerings. And if they just chose good, they're like, I'm protected. But at the end of the day, the risks keep changing. They're getting more severe and higher in number for SMBs. So couple of things to consider there. One is, is the good, better, best always the best way to approach this with a customer? I don't know that it is anymore. I would suggest that I've got a set of core offerings that I am going to implement to give you a level of security, right? So there's no choice in the matter. That's always tough, right? Because a managed service provider's job is to get customers. And sometimes if you say, this is my base level, this is the comprehensive, and this is what we do for everybody, and they say, no, that's too much for me, you have a decision to make, right? That decision is, do I take on this customer? Do I, as a managed service provider, buy that risk for this much a month, right? So yes, I understand that there are definitely some areas or verticals that need additional advanced security. You could probably piecemeal those or have different levels or add-ons or things. But I would argue that taking a look at your core security, if you don't feel it's good enough, if you've said, well, this is my bottom tier, then it's your bottom tier. Why would you want to offer that? I would say, no, I have security, right? I'm going to put, this is my security, and then I might have some advanced security that handles, certain compliance regulations, intellectual property, high risk data, those kind of things as add-ons. But I would argue, really take a look at your current offerings, add in those places where you feel like something's missing based on the current attack paths that are going on, and say, this is what we need to have everybody at.
No, I think that makes perfect sense, because you also get into the discussions, and I've seen this at many events, where you'll have providers saying, well, I have the high level that I recommend them to move up to, but if they don't go to that, I have them sign this waiver and I'm good. And then I have an attorney who's very good in IT security going, don't do that, because if you have anybody at the lowest level, you're still responsible as an MSP.
And you
your
offered it to
liability
him.
doesn't go away. What's that?
You offered it to him, right? I mean, that's the
You've
thing.
acknowledged that there is a problem.
So you may avoid some additional monetary claims. And I did see something the other day. One phishing email made it into an organization. They sued their service provider. Wow, that's pretty hardcore. I mean, I always joke, turn off that protection for an hour and then ask them again, is this good protection or not, right?
Yeah.
But that being said, the big concern, it might limit your monetary damages, but you're not going to keep that customer. With something happens, the guy's going to move on, and he's going to find someone else who offers more or less. It doesn't matter. But at the end of the day, keeping that monthly recurring revenue and that customer happy is your goal. And sometimes short-term decisions for keeping that customer might actually damage your long-term. Hey, you don't want to end up in the news because you lose that customer plus 5 more, right?
Yeah, and that's a difficult part. I think when you look at cybersecurity's kind of moved into a new wave. It's not just about the technology today. It's about the legal liabilities and the financial liabilities, I think, are the other part. When you look at, we talked earlier about MSPs getting hacked, it's more than just the fact that they're going to have some responsibility to fix it and to take care of it. Financial, they could have also compliance, non-compliance fees,
right,
for some of the new regulations coming on. So the game has kind of shifted a lot. Let me take a step back here too. What can and should IT service providers be doing right now to ensure their customers retain confidence in their protection capabilities? As we hear all these stories of MSPs, and we know it's probably going to get worse before it gets better.
Agreed.
Especially in the media. What can they do, or what should they be doing, like, immediately to make this stop?
Yeah, to your point, the media, there are a few trusted voices in the media right now who are being really hard on managed service providers.
Right.
And so that's a concern. So I would imagine that a lot of small and medium businesses are looking at that and saying, well, what's mine doing? So there's a huge list. Obviously, we talked about the standard kind of cybersecurity focus, but at the end of the day, it's things like we talked about it, making sure you're not using the same credentials across all your customers, making sure that all your technicians don't have access to every customer if they don't need it, right? Generally, you assign a few techs with one tech with a backup or something like that. They're the ones that should have access to that customer. But also things like, I talk about this one a lot. I'm a big advocate for this. In this day and age, having a lot of services and ports exposed to the internet, huge problem, huge concern. I talk to guys all the time. Are you allowing remote desktop connections over the internet? Let me show you in 5 minutes why that's a bad idea. There's so many tools out there now that can simply scan for ports and services, find those remote desktop connections, show you a screenshot of who was logged on to it. And then from there, there are actually some unauthenticated vulnerabilities in remote desktop that can be exploited without needing all of that information. So taking a look at how, for example, you have a customer that says, I need to access this system because it's got my tax information on it and I need to do it from home because I'm the big boss, right? Okay, well, let me set you up with a remote desktop gateway or something like that, and you're actually exposing them to risk. Consider when you do something like that, alternative methods, right? Hey, let me set you up with a VPN system, VPN client, where you have to be on the network before you can access that remote desktop and then authenticate. Or let me set you up with a different type of remote access, one of the commercial tools out there that allow you to authenticate, put two-factor authentication up against it, things like that. So making sure that you're shoring up all of those things, absolutely critical, because I'm really surprised that more small and medium businesses aren't sending emails to their service providers saying, hey, are we at risk for this stuff? I'm seeing it in the news. But once you've done all of that, then I recommend putting that together in a simple, security statement. Be proactive about it. Say, here's what we're doing. I know you've been seeing this stuff in the news. These are the things that we do to protect you, to protect your customers, protect your crown jewels. That review that with them. Maybe have it in your next QBR or monthly business review with them. Talk about security, and then pivot that to, okay, now we need to make sure that on your side that everything is tightened up based on today's threat landscape. One way I actually did this at the talk in Houston, I showed an attack path and said, look at all the layers that this one attack touches, right? It requires people. And if you train the people, maybe they won't click, but somebody's going to click. And then what happens next? Do you have your endpoints shored up? Do you have all your policies in place? Have you done a review of all the policies to make sure you haven't drifted away from your core policies? That happens a lot. So getting that buy-in back from the customer once you've said, here's what I'm doing to protect you, opens you up for more opportunity to say, hey, here's what we need to do now for you. And that could be adopting new products. It could be adopting new policies. Maybe you've been trying to get a customer to do user training. Now's the time, right? This is why. So I would use this as an opportunity to say, hey, I know there's challenges going on out there and there's concern. Let's go ahead and address these head on.
Now, in many cases, I think MSPs are very good at leading by example. And security is a good place, to your point, of going back, making sure you're shored up all of these practices and tools. But at the same point, the weak link I have to say that MSPs have is communicating it back to their clients and prospects.
Always.
So that point that you mentioned is sitting down in QBRs, talking about it, even sharing some things on social media or in email newsletters, those type of things of, here's what we're doing, although you want to be somewhat cautious sharing too much stuff.
You don't want to map an attack for a bad actor, right?
Right. You want to provide just enough info for clients so that they feel assured, but not to your point, mapping it out. But no, I think that's great. One other thing before we finish up today, I wanted to go into is the resource utilization is crucial for MSPs. Efficient use of the people, their tools, all of the things. They have a set number of assets that they can work with.
It's a business.
It's a business. And obviously the excruciatingly high cost of building and offering high-level cybersecurity offerings continues to rise. What advice do you have for providers who want to offer more advanced services to their clients? What's the best way to do it?
Yeah, this is a tough one, right? Because we know, like we talked about, SMBs kind of have this basic or comprehensive protection, but there are gaps, right? And these days, when you're talking about staying up against adversaries, you have to monitor the network. You have to look for those indicators of compromise. They're recommending doing threat hunting and things that are very intensive. What I mean by that is intensive. It requires somebody's eyes to be on it all the time. Somebody needs to be watching that and staying on top of, is this a threat? Is this not a threat? How do we need to act? I've been speaking to a lot of managed service providers, some who say, that is not in my wheelhouse, right? I'm focused on the day-to-day servicing of my customers. I can't afford to have somebody with one eye always on some scrolling dashboard or red, green, yellow, and all those things. So you're seeing this a lot more where you do have the focused MSPs, the security service providers who offer those exact services, right? Advanced firewall monitoring, log monitoring, network monitoring, correlation of that stuff, threat hunting. So you are seeing a lot of managed service providers actually partnering up with MSSPs, and the MSSPs actually realizing, hey, this is a great service that I can then add to the managed service providers, where I do the overwatch and the monitoring and all of those things. And then I pass the information on, here are my recommendations to the MSP who owns the relationship with that customer. And it becomes a very, win-win situation for everybody. This is a way that small and medium businesses can actually get that additional advanced security, and how an MSP can offer that without disrupting that day-to-day, utilization measurement and profit margins and all the things you have to think about as a business. However, I have talked to a few who've gone even further and said, you know what, I am going to establish an MSSP, but it's going to be separate. I'm not going to let it muddy the waters of my core business. And then maybe, right, it requires a lot of investment up front. I mean, setting up a security operations center and all of the tools, and that's not cheap. I mean, that is an expensive proposition, especially because of the skills gap and the issues we have on the side of actually hiring people who can staff and monitor, right? So all of that being said, some of them are building that out, but they're keeping it separate. Now they're using that as part of their security offerings for, I can give you advanced security, but they're also then targeting organizations that do have their own IT or some of their own IT staff or those types of things. And so it's almost like a spin out that services the MSP. So I've seen some people do that, and I have actually seen very few actually say, no, I'm done with MSP, I'm moving to just MSSP, but that's a very small amount of people. Being an MSP is in your bones, then that's what you're going to do. So maybe you should consider, do I partner, or do I, can over time have a goal of growing out a separate arm? That's kind of a decision you have to make.
Is this a conversation you're having more often as the head nerd that
it is
talking with them about understanding their clients' needs and their own markets?
Absolutely is. In fact, some of the ones I've been talking to who have started doing that are targeting certain verticals that have these requirements, that have additional regulations that they have to comply with and things like that, where they need that advanced security. So you see this kind of targeting of certain businesses, and I talked to one service provider who's like, yeah, the MSP thing is great, but I see more value in this, and I have some who are like, nope, I'm keeping them separate. But yeah, they do see the value. Now there are a lot of managed service providers out there who are like, yeah, I don't know where to start. So I would argue engaging with an MSSP who's interested in this relationship is a great way to start.
And I think more than some areas too is the partnerships are almost required, especially when it comes down to compliance and auditing. You need to have a separate party looking at things. Right. Also, to kind of going back through to making sure, validating that as an MSP, you're doing all the right things too, for liability and insurance reasons. There's a host of, I guess, reasons why to partner in cybersecurity.
Absolutely.
Just depends on what it looks like. What does your individual model? Is it a mix of vendors, MSSPs, other compliance experts? There's a whole host of options.
Yeah, you bring up a good point, right? If you're going to engage a third party to actually assess your security, what was the old saying? If I say it about myself, it's bragging. If someone says it about me, it's the truth, right? Well, it's kind of the same thing here. If I have a third party validate my security controls and my security, that goes a long way towards adding that to being able to put security on the front page, I call it, right? It's not a 3-click down, yeah, we offer security services too, but it's like, I offer security as one of the core components of my offering to all of my customers. And don't believe me, believe these guys.
Yeah, I think that was also the value of a CompTIA Security Trustmark Plus, is that audited, you could go through the process as an MSP or even as a vendor and looking at, are they following all these NIST standards and then these extra channel standards and working? I wish CompTIA would put more promotion behind that and start focusing it, because those that have it swear by it, but it's a good tool for not just validating, but also marketing, to say, hey, CompTIA has validated our security practice.
And I would argue as the year progresses, and these articles keep coming out, it's not, as you said, it's not going to get better before it gets a little worse, I think.
Right.
And people are going to, as you go out to talk to a prospective customer, it's going to be on their list of bullet points that they need to ask you. Whereas it may have been something really down here, you're going to manage my security software for me. No, it's going to be in the top 3. What are you doing to protect my assets through my relationship with you?
Fantastic. Well, of course, we always run out of time too soon on these conversations. So do you have any final thoughts for our listeners before we sign off today, Gill?
Other than the fact that I'm really excited, as you mentioned earlier, in this role where I can have just open, frank conversations with managed service providers. Hopefully, I can add some value by bringing what they're saying together and into some practices and some processes and things. I'm really excited about that. We've said it several times, though, is that security and security concerns for SMBs and their service providers are not going away. So, I would recommend you get that subject matter expert who stays focused on it and can bring that back into your business. I think that if you do nothing else in 2020 when it comes to securing your customers, having that subject matter expert is the best thing you can do.
Fantastic. Well, I'm looking forward to hopefully having you back before long, too, to tap into some of those other conversations you're having.
Looking forward to
partners. Awesome. So a big thank you to today's special guest on the Secure Connections podcast, Gill Langston of Solarwinds MSP. Be sure to stop back next Wednesday for another great channel cybersecurity discussion, and check out all of our MSP-focused resources at iotsa.com. Have a secure and very profitable day. Thank you.